Good afternoon. Welcome to today's session of innovLogue at IL. I'm Darren and I'll be your host and moderator for today's session. We are having a hybrid session today. So for those of you who are joining us physically, thank you very much. Really appreciate you guys coming here. And for those of you who are at home right now, thank you for joining us virtually as well. We are going to have a little bit of interactions as we go through today's session. And you will be able to interact and ask questions to our guests today. And we'll be using a tool called Slido, which I'll introduce to you guys in a short while. And through that tool, you are able to use to ask questions and have some interactions. Today, we will be discussing whether or not the technology being used in education and in learning in organizations is actually working or not. Is working or not. Sorry about that. And this term, EdTech, or educational technology, is a broad term and has been used in different ways by different people and means different things to different people. In fact, let's kick things off with a quick activity on Slido. So what I'd like y'all to do is to take up your phone. If you've not used this tool before, just take up your phone, whip it out, and go to this website. Or you can go to slido.com and in the participants tab, just put in the code that you see right now. Thank you. Give me 1 second. Okay. And here we go. So when you hear the word EdTech, what comes to mind? Give you guys a few moments. Interesting. So online learning, LMS, expensive. Okay. Right. Okay. Remote learning, not Zoom. That is interesting. Someone put there. What's EdTech? It's not Zoom. Tech-enabled learning. Okay. Complexity. Some of you think that it's complex. Shouldn't be Zoom. Or is this an LMS? That's an interesting question. Is EdTech just about LMSs? I just saw adaptive learning, self-paced learning, very interesting. Give you all another 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Micro-learning. That's the tech tool of the day, yeah? Micro-learning. Needs external expertise, so that's going to be interesting as well. Do we need to tap on external experts to help us implement EdTech in organizations, or can we do it ourselves? Mobile learning, all right? So another 5 seconds and I'll teach better. So technology to help us teach better. Okay, thank you very much. So as you can see, it means many different things to different people. And today we'll be discussing whether or not the technology being used in education and in learning in organizations is actually working. To help us unpack this, what it means to use technology in education, explore the application of such technology in various contexts, and the things we should take note of when using technology in learning. We are privileged with us to have 3 gentlemen who are experts in the field of educational technology. All right, and we have Dr. Samson Tan. Please, a round of applause. Dr. Samson Tan is the head of strategic development at Civica and the former head of the Center for Innovation in Learning at NIE. He is an expert in the learning sciences, strategy, and lifelong learning. He has many years of experience in innovating and transforming education, and we are privileged to hear his views on the current state of EdTech and how it should transform to meet both current and future needs of adult learners. We also have Mr. Sandeep Aneja, who is the founder of Kaizen Vest, which is an education-focused asset management company. He brings with him a broad range of experience in consulting, operations, and investment management, and he will be sharing with us on how EdTech can be better brought up to market and be made more relevant to the modern digital workforce, and how companies can better link EdTech to performance and growth. Round of applause, please. Thank you. And we have Mr. Alvinder Singh, who is the Managing Director of Visionary Schoolmen, a company which focuses on helping organizations in learning, skills, and capability development. And he will be sharing with us the need for change in these constantly evolving times, and how real-world learning and learning analytics can create greater EdTech value in the modern workforce. Please give me a round, warm applause for all of them. Thank you very much. So, without further ado, and I'm your host, Darren, from the Learn Better company. Thank you very much. Host and moderator for the session, yeah? So without further ado, we shall get in with Mr. There is a bit of a, okay, yes, Dr. Samson Tan, floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, yeah. Hi, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to be back to see real people in person, right? Since a long time ago, I think I was just chatting with the rest. It's like, this is like 3 years that I've been away from IAL. And right now I'm back here in this space, and very good to see people over here drinking, and we are chatting and talking. Wonderful. And of course, you know, for the last 3 years, we have been like talking to cameras, like and webcams, yeah, training, teaching through that. And big hello to all of you who are logged in from wherever you are. We look forward to an exciting afternoon ahead. I'm Samson. Happy to be here. I'm going to kickstart with our first chat. I'll say a talk about is EdTech failing. I was just commenting, is that, oh, it's such a provocative title, right? So you evoke discussion, evoke dissension, perhaps, about what using this kind of title to that. But I think this is good, right? Not coming to a conclusion so quickly. But I think I would like to take that question to another, to rephrase it separately to this. You see, that's what happened when you use technology, right? When you want to click, it doesn't, okay, wait, I'll click here. Very good, wonderful. Yeah, it's woken up already. So how are we using technology in education? Obviously, right, what we are doing over here is that, how have we been using it? Is it effectively used before we start to say that the technology is failing us? How about us as teachers, as trainers, as learning designers? Is it effectively used? Yeah, so that's one of the ways to look at it. When I was asked to speak at this event, some people asking, oh yeah, that's because I used to work for NIE. They think that I'll start this with talking about theories and big frameworks and all that. We'll get to that, you know, plenty of that along the way. But I think it's better, and I would like to start with a story about how technology is being used in teaching and education. So this, I'm not sure whether you have read this. This is from BBC, 3rd of July, focused on things that's happening in Europe right now. This Ukrainian teacher, right now, the title of that story was "Teachers in Ukraine Creating Classrooms for the Trenches." I thought it was very amazing. It was quite, what was that? Resonating with that, because I think years ago when I was serving in the reservice, something like him, with my rifle sling at one side, I was replying a student's email, SMS, ask for help. But obviously very different. We are in peacetime over here in Singapore, over in Europe right now, and Ukraine. They're really fighting for their life, fighting for their country. Lots of respect to them. His name is Fidel Shando. He's a professor in sociology and teaches tourism to his students. So obviously, call of duty, and then he joined the armed forces and fighting for the freedom right now. Seriously, right now, they are really fighting. And I hope he's all right, because this is in July. And he talked about teaching. He wanted to do so because his students' schools were bombed and they were all learning online. And he did that twice a week in his trenches. And he was saying that students become very motivated for obvious reasons. That those students who used to skip his classes alternate when he has his lecture. And he has his lectures in his trenches, he showed them around what it was like. And he mentioned or rather the journalist mentioned in part of it is that when they were shelling, and shelling is horrible, right? And he was hiding in the trenches and his students could hear all those voices or the noises of war. And I think that's really authentic teaching at its best. And all thanks to Elon Musk for making Starlinks available to Ukraine so that the invaders couldn't shut them out. And students get to continue to learn, even though they were under such duress. So this is one story about how technology somehow facilitated some form of learning, even in extreme conditions like what we see in Ukraine. So moving on, we are not out of the woods yet. I think we experienced some form of that in our own context over here. In fact, the whole world had done that in the last 2 to 3 years. And to be honest, we are not totally out of the woods yet, right? But I think we have progressed somewhat, at least in over here in Singapore, to the extent that we can have hybrid events now. I don't have to wear a mask to talk to you. I remember when we had our conference in NIE 2 years back, or rather last year, we wanted to have a real hybrid. We wanted to have a hybrid session, so we brought the panel like this to the event itself, and everybody else logged in online. And I said, well, panel discussion is so boring without seeing the expressions of the teachers, the panelists. So he gave them face masks, transparent ones. So that was the best we could do, but it was a bit clunky. Obviously not the best situation. So I truly appreciate right now that we can have this session. But in April 2020 was obviously very dire situations. We had 1.6 billion people out of school. Obviously, for us teachers, trainers, we're pivoting very heavily to find some form of ways to get our students to have some form of learning. And let's see it. What are some of those challenges? It's that there's this saying, right? Crisis, in Chinese writing, it's called Wei Ji. Wei Ji is 2 words over here. Is that on the left, Wei means crisis. On the right, Ji means danger, right? And just in case you think that this is the way that we Chinese look at danger, or rather crisis, I think it was made famous in not many people know. Again, you see the teacher coming into me right now. In 1959, it was JFK himself who made this famous when he used that to galvanize the Americans to a crisis that we were facing. Probably you start thinking, what kind of crisis was that? It was the Sputnik moment, right? So it was the Russians were the first to launch their human flight to space. And they realized that they are falling behind as the education system were not producing the best to compete technologically with the Soviet Union at that time. So it was a Sputnik moment for them, the crisis, to spur people to start thinking about the possibility. So we ask ourselves today, do we have a Sputnik moment right now with this crisis, with this pandemic? Well, I think it's still in the making, and see whether we can learn from crisis itself. So let's look at some of the dangers or the challenges that it has brought to us. I think this is a slide that would summarize some of those challenges over here, our school, and the rest of us are trying to pivot or move learning somewhat online, and probably not in the best situation. It was a lot of remote teaching, learning, people panicking for the longest time. They never knew that they need to go digital learning, but they had to at that point of time. And then even in the higher education side, you realize that, wow, we had overseas students stuck wherever they are. They can't come back to campus. So how do they learn? And again, obviously, it also takes a toll to our mental health, and probably still does today. All right, so a lot of that happening. Some of the challenges that came to bear is that you start to realize that when we move lessons online, even in the best intention of that, some of the students are probably not able to access that. In Singapore, we are quite fortunate over here is that internet connection is quite stable, and most of us were able to get that. But I think in many parts of the world whereby you find that this pivot to online created this, accentuate this digital divide. And UNESCO realized that at the later part and in their studies and found that. And then when you have lessons there, what are the problems? Students were not able to have the devices. They don't have the device. In Singapore over here, or many parts of the developed world, probably in one family, more devices than human. And internet connections, right? Even if you have, is it stable enough to do that? I remember I was with EdTech Asia talk in the panelists as well. So we have panelists from the rest of Southeast Asia as well, talking about how to help students cope with that. And it will be devastating to hear that there are students who are not able to go to school. They have to walk miles just to get internet connection so that they can do online learning. And that was that kind of situation that we were there. And just in case you think that we are totally unscathed over in Singapore, just take a look at the last line over there. In April 2020, our Ministry of Education has loaned out 12,500 laptops and tablets. Even in us in Singapore, we need to do that. And 1,200 over internet dongles, so that our students who are not able to, the underserved, underprivileged ones, are able to get online to do learning. And can you imagine how the magnitude of that all over the world? Yeah. So this is the reality. Well, technology is there. It's not that. Well, in this case over here is that can we get access to the technology and use that technology for learning? Well, a lot of bad news that I've just dished up, and let's look at some of the good news over here. I'm probably not in the best position to talk about the investment in technology itself, in EdTech itself. Probably my other panelists will be able to look into more of that in the investment area. You realize that even pre-pandemic, there's huge investment that poured into technology itself, and obviously EdTech itself benefited from that kind of investment. And in 2020 itself, you can see that such a huge jump in 2021 as well. And the three countries that invested the most, obviously you can see that in red, blue, and India. And China took almost like double from 2019 to 2020. You may want to ask yourself what happened in 2021 when the rest of the world are still investing and knowing that the importance in education technology. Probably on the slide view over here, probably you must have remembered there was a crackdown in China about tutoring, and a lot of EdTech investment in China centered around there. And until today, I think 2020, you probably don't see anything there reported anymore. I'm not sure whether there's a lack of data or is it really that bad? Yeah, so let's hear from the rest of the panelists. Let's move on a little bit more. Well, then I think break down the data a little bit and it perhaps make a little bit more sense. Well, we are over here talking about adult learning, right? So the workforce part of the investment in education is probably more relevant to our discussion today. Although the rest, yeah, as interesting, but I'm just going to skip right there. So you have seen like more than $100 billion kind of growth in the next, 5 years, yeah, which is pretty substantial. I remember this story over here in the 2020. So among the adult educators, some of my friends will actually set up their own business teaching, training, yeah. And when it hit, I think one of the things that she mentioned to us that she thought, that's it, she just started a business in grooming and ethics. And everything just went online. How is she going to do that? And she thought it was going to be dead in the water. And then she realized that there was a lifeline in form of remote teaching. And she was able to engage her learners in teaching, and she shared it openly. I think obviously during that period of time, all the institutions, including IAL itself, we had training, helping people to reskill, help learners, trainers, how to pivot. Recommendation. This, I think, InLab itself has been engaging a lot of the, just as we do in the university sector as well. When I was with NIE, we've been engaging them how, training the lecturers how to pivot and do better with online teaching. And I think a lot of that has gone into that investment. And of course, our government through SkillsFuture Singapore, there was a lot of training grants being given out to the industry as well to support that industries who sorely needed that very much during that time. So we look at other opportunities over here. It was pretty okay for a while in 2020, but I think a lot of that kind of strategy in the pivot was remote instructions, a bit of first aid, if you like. I think what is really discovered over here in studies is that capability development for the teaching faculty or teachers is really paramount to better use of technology. So then again, over here is like, so what do we do as we move forward over here? What do we start to see some of the changes over here? So studies have shown that, well, this is a good time to engage all the stakeholders in education to not only just about digital learning, not only about getting us all online. You know, one of the things that very funny that happens to us, those of us in EdTech, is this now. Before the pandemic, when we try to tell our to tell people how important it is, to pivot very quickly, and to a lot of educators, teachers, lecturers alike, they said, well, I still like the in-person training. I still do, right? But it's optional to go digital learning. And we were working on a paper, right, to talk about blended learning, the important, the future, how it looks like. And by the time the pandemic hit us, the paper got approved at our university. And then my colleague turned around and said, whoa, you foresaw that. You saw that coming. And no, I'm not that good. I'm not God. I didn't see that. We just saw that it's important for us to get into hybrid learning, blended learning. So we worked on that paper, got it approved as a policy in the university. But then pandemic hit, and Ministry of Education Technologies Division turned to us and said, what are some of the things that we can share with them? So we shared them. But right now, I think it is more than that. I'm saying over here is that we need to look at who are the people who are least served or underserved or underprivileged that we need to do better. And I think in the context of workforce learning, for example, which are the sectors have been receiving a lot of support in that? Are there any other sectors that are not benefiting from all the training that's provided to them? Is that industry specific, or within industry itself, there are certain learners who have that kind of challenges? One of those things I remember in earlier days is that when I saw some of my friends who were facilitating, some of the learners were using their mobile phone on Zoom, and it was like on their, they were holding up for a while. Then after a while, they become horizontal because it's so tiring using a mobile device. And obviously, is that something that is inappropriate for a long session of learning that way? So you start to think about how is there a way to equipping them, getting them better in digital part of learning, getting them on board, yeah. And of course, we have to look at the challenge of the traditional or the non-traditional students. So what do I mean by that is that in a university context, we used to think that traditional students must enroll in university for 3 years to 4 years. But now that we are putting learning online, is there a way to reach beyond that? I think, is there something that we can think about? And lastly, I think one of the most important things is about, do we have enough of low-cost equipment that can help people to learn better? I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next slide over here. Interesting development over here is that this company, we talk about equipping educators. A friend started this company called Acadasia, and I think it's a common friend among the speakers and some of us here as well. And at the time, it was like, it just so happened that there's a need to equip teachers to help them pivot. And so because of his approach in doing that, it reduced the barrier of entry to get teachers to start learning how to use digital tools, digital platforms, and redesign their lessons. It helped somewhat in many places, and obviously his business took off. So that's one interesting development. The other development is that EdTech companies, is that some of the EdTech tools that we provided pre-pandemic, yeah, it was able to help people in the perhaps developed economy, but exorbitantly expensive for the underserved developing world. And so what you see is that the new breed of EdTech entrepreneurs is that they have developed this two were highlighted by World Economic Forum, just in case you think that I plugged this from somewhere. So these are the ones that were developed to be low code, low bandwidth, that is accessible by communities that are not able to afford them, right? So just in case you think they are low technology, but a lot of it is AI and machine learning powered. So just in case you're interested in knowing more, take a look at that. I think I'm running out of time. I better speed up a bit more. So with technology and all that, then we get very into this question as well. Do we still need human educators? I always get this question even before the pandemic. So Samson, do we still have a job as a teacher, as a lecturer? Okay, then I'm going to show this slide over here. Overuse. Since 2019, I've been giving talks during the overused, but I always think that it is important for us to focus on this. It's about a schoolgirl in China that got so upset with the homework that the teachers gave in learning Chinese language itself. They are required to copy text and passages, things like that. I wonder how that is going to improve the learning. Anyway, she got so fed up that she bought a robot that are able to copy text on her behalf. And not only that, the robot is smart enough to imitate her handwriting. How smart that is, huh? And then, well, she was so happy until she was discovered by her mom, the whistleblower. Right? After that, went online, everybody want to get one of these robots. So my question over here, my answer to my friends who asked the question whether they are relevant, I said, if you teach like that, then you can be replaced by a robot anytime, right? Right. So again, it points back to us. How do we use the technology? How do we teach? How do we design? I just offer three. The teachers of the future or trainers of the future, three things, right? So we need to become architects of learning environments. You have digital transformation, whether you like it or not, it's happening, right? It's happening at frightening speed, right? The blending of digital space and physical space, blending of formal learning environment in the classroom as well, informal learning environment. Technology can help us to get there, but are we trying to do so? Facilitators of learning. So, well, in the internet age, information is so easily available online. Do you need to sit down here and listen in order to get in the information? Obviously not, right? How do you facilitate that? Yeah. And then shapers of, well, in the perhaps character, but I think in the adult learning context, it's the attitudes of learning, attitudes of working, the aptitudes as well. So we always ask this question, are you trying to teach science or are you trying to teach a person to become a scientist or to think like a scientist? Important over here is how do you shape that, but you cannot mold that, right? So I think these are the three. I think I've exceeded my allocated time. I'm just going to end over here and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So what we, for those of you who are here, if you have any questions, please just go to Slido. And for those of you at home as well, just go to Slido. We'll give you a moment if you have any questions. And there are some interesting questions right now that we can actually address. And Dr. Sampson will take some of these questions briefly before our next speaker. Just give you a moment. For those of you at home, wherever you are, please participate and smile at home, huh? Okay. Looks like... Can we have the slides? Oh boy. In every class that I ever do, that's the question. I'm not sure this one, in-lab folk will, yeah, I think you will, right? You have the recording for this. Okay. Perhaps the first question, I think that's a very interesting one. Why is EdTech still at the level of accessibility? Dr. Sampson, I think you talked about initially how the COVID situation had surfaced the challenges in even getting access to the internet, to technology, to hardware, and so on. In the context of the workforce, are there any barriers that might be preventing companies, for example, to really maximizing the EdTech capabilities, for example? I find that that's a complex question. It probably varies from different sector to sector. There are some sectors in which that require you, obviously it doesn't apply to IT, but these are the people who are so deep in the technology, they are using technology all the time in their work. And probably it has got to do with some sector will seldom get in touch with technology itself. And you realize that and employees in this sector, on a daily basis, they don't need the tech to get work done, or very little amount of tech done. And so they probably don't own a computer. They probably, I think mobile phone becomes one of the easiest way to, if you like, push the learning to them. And if you think about it, we talk a lot about micro learning, bite-sized learning. Yeah, a lot of that can be pushed that way, but to a certain extent, right? To a certain extent, you can reach that. Two examples that I showed earlier: no code required, and then inexpensive.
That means low cost of getting access to learning. I think those are the two important factors to consider. You can have fantastic training, but so expensive. Wow, so I cannot sign up. So then you will prevent, I suspect, a large number of people in the workforce to access those trainings. I mean, on their own. I mean, in Singapore, we're quite blessed. Companies are blessed because we have training grants and all that, very generous one, but I think we cannot depend on that forever. At some point of time, I think governments will be rolling back some of these training grants, and we need to take a hard look at it. Without the grants, will we still be sending our employee for training? I think that's an important question.
Thank you. And I think that's a very important realization that very often the best tool that you have is a tool that you have with you.
Yeah.
And if you don't have or not much access to laptops and so on, or that's more of a barrier than a phone, then that does have, I think, implications in terms of the way you design the learning, the kind of technology that you use, the platforms, and so on. So thank you very much, Dr. Tan.
Right.
Round of applause.
Thank you.
And to welcome our next speaker, Mr. Sandeep Aneja. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Aaron.
There you go, sir.
Thank you, appreciate it. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Before I get started, I'd like to get to know you a bit better. So you have perhaps my bio to read, but I don't know anything about all of you. Would you sort of quickly, maybe they can use the poll? It's possible to tell us if they're entrepreneurs, educators, investors, trainers, students, if the audience here and the audience out on Zoom, who we are. And you can get to that whenever you're ready, but let me get started with my talk. I'll keep looking at it to get a sense for the audience in the meantime. Thank you. Yeah, pleasure to be here, and thank you, IAL, for inviting me. What I would like to cover today is, while listening to Dr. Tan, I changed my entire thought process because I'd like to, so I rewrote the whole thing. Let's see if I can get to it. My idea is to tell you that EdTech has been here with us forever. My idea is to tell you that EdTech is not new. I want to remind you that in EdTech, education is first, tech is next. I want to play in that thought process, in that domain of thinking. And if we can, as an investor, I would like to prove to you that we can actually do well, drive accessibility, drive quality, and drive innovation if we keep education at the center, tech behind. So whenever you're ready, I can get started with the slides. So let me know. Yeah, I can continue. Should I press this button, the middle one? The middle button? Sorry, little technically inept, but definitely. Thank you. Yeah, when it's not clicking. Point here. Okay, thank you. So what is EdTech? Now, this is where I want to start. We believe that technology has come into the classroom, which was traditionally teacher-centered and disrupted where we are today, with the student theoretically at the center of learning. That's one view of how EdTech has evolved, where we had a bunch of libraries, and a lot of the licensing that occurred for schools and colleges was based on how many books you had in the library. That was a good method of regulatory bodies giving licenses to education institutions. Now it's all about, can you access digital content which was in bookshelves much more actively? That's a version of digitization, therefore it's considered EdTech. Then there are systems and tools that make life easier for teachers, for administrators, and for overall the students as well in the EdTech system. They are considered part of what is EdTech. So that's how we think of EdTech. What, however, I'd like to present to you is that EdTech is not new. And there has always been and will be a good tension between education and technology. Here, we today talk about the fact that maintaining a student's engagement in a classroom, in a virtual classroom, can be challenging. That's a tension. Education is trying to be delivered through a television, through a laptop, through a mobile device, and the student has multiple other distractions around him or her. That's the tension between education and technology. Now let's go back to the years of blackboards. When there was a blackboard, it's not technology, but truly it is. The teacher has to turn around. When the teacher turns around, there's immediate tension in the classroom. Students are distracted. Just to be able to overcome that tension with the technology of a blackboard, a whiteboards came along. Whiteboards are something you can click on. Overhead projectors came along so the teacher could maintain attention. But there's tension again. There's so much you can capture in a slide set. There's so much you can capture in a slide set that delivers value to the learners. That's tension. It all comes down to teaching and learning process in the classroom. So when we think of education technology now requiring teachers' roles to change to facilitators, I don't think that's true today. I think it's always been the case. Great teachers facilitate learning, don't deliver learning. There's a big difference. A great teacher would generally engage the classroom in a very interactive manner by asking the smartest questions. You deliver teaching the best type by show and tell. You encourage show and tell through inquiry, through generating curiosity. And that is never done by telling you more of what I know. That's me telling myself I'm a great teacher. If I want to be a great teacher, I'm not NIE, I don't understand teaching because I've never been trained in it. But as a father, that's how I teach my kids. When I sit with them, and I've always had the privilege to teach my own kids as a tutor, we've never had tutor for our kids. I would sit next to them and look at Khan Academy and say, honestly, I forgot that calculus formula. I used to know it. Can we learn it together? The engagement I get by making that the problem and learning with my child is mind-blowing. As opposed to my telling my child, let me tell you, even if I don't know, let me learn it quickly, let me tell you. Never works. So I think by learning together, by inquiring together, I find it a whole lot more effective. And that's a facilitation job. So I think it's just that we are looking at education from a more critical perspective today because of EdTech. For the first time, EdTech has brought a lot of the conversation of teaching and learning, which we used to never think about. We took it for granted. Let me give you an analogy. For the first time, EdTech came into our rooms, into our bedrooms, into our dining tables, because our children were suffering, we were suffering. Classes were shut, schools were shut. He said, now let's wake up. But the analogy for education, and it is something that is super slow. It's resistant to change. If you look at what's a similar thing that we use every day that's resistant to change, it's energy. We are trying to get from where we are today to smart energy, to carbon neutral energy forms. Generally, energy cycles are 40 to 60-year cycles. But the good news about energy, we see it in the form of light, in the form of heat. The bad news about education, we don't see it. It's not visible. When education's not there, there's no fire in Amazon forest or California, no flooding. But if electricity is not there, immediately we're in the dark. So I think education is super prevalent, super within us. It's not visible. So we have taken it for granted. For the first time, it's been lit up. So we're all looking at it. So I think what I like about EdTech as an investor, we are all willing to converse and talk about it. That's the best thing we've achieved from it. So let me go back into the traditional thought process of what is education and drive through the thinking process of what's going on, what are some of the innovations taking place, which are making us think about EdTech as an investable asset class. A lot of companies are challenging the status quo. We know Genie Book in Singapore, there are multiple others like those, I'll just name one, and they are all challenging the status quo of how learning has taken place. There is another area which is for university college admission, where you want to go to a good college, now you have a tech product, you can look at your GPA, your SAT score, and determine based on your GPA, your SAT score, how that relates to your likelihood of getting to a college. That's automated. So much information is on your fingertips. And then someone asks you, who is the competitor for that company? The company that gives me the data for GPA and for my SAT score. how many companies are there, and who else has that data? When a typical investor, EdTech entrepreneur comes to us, they say, oh, there are 5 other companies which are capturing this data. Fine, and they're all education technology companies. Honestly, the biggest competitor is the real estate company, because education is so closely tied to real estate. We pick our location of our houses based on our children's education. But when I talk to an entrepreneur, they will never tell me a real estate company is my competitor, when I know the real estate company has much better data on the children in that neighborhood around their SAT, their GPAs, and why they pick that and which college they go to. In fact, real estate companies today like niche.com in US have way better data on the neighborhood and which college they go to, because they collect the data from the public school system. And that data is way more powerful than any EdTech company will tell me here, which has collected data school by school. So we've got to think of education as very pervasive. The impact it has on society is pretty strong. We know that. The impact EdTech has is very visible now. So I think I'm just repeating the previous point to say that it's more vast, more impactful, more powerful, but very silent. Pre-K, questions around why pre-K EdTech is not working. We understand there is a screen time issue. There is an engagement issue. There is a new World Economic Forum data that I just came across a couple of days ago, which says anybody that wants great attention, we have a circadian rhythm. And within circadian rhythm, which we have a rhythm which is a learning and focus rhythm. The realization for a lot of us learners and teachers is that it's a 2-hour rhythm. Anything above 2 hours, you do in any intense, focused manner, you start to have reducing returns on the time spent. Okay, so that gets into pedagogy design, that gets into engagement design. So there are ways to overcome some of the greatest ills we feel exist because of technology getting into learning. But is it all bad or is it all good? Let's find out. So I think one of the good things, let's cover that first, is EdTech, use of technology, thoughtfully done, is creating a new method of teaching and learning. Teachers who were just out of classroom and in classroom were able to deliver teaching learning in an engaged manner can actually now get into an out of classroom setting through technology, through flipped classrooms, requesting students to study first, then come to class for a discussion, which was always the case for a lot of business schools, but it's becoming more traditional for not just higher learning, but also for younger years learning. Instruction has slowly moved from what the teacher knows to what the student needs to know, or student knows. And there's a subtle difference between what the student needs to know versus what the student will know. And we'll discuss that in upcoming slides as well. So there's definite movement away from teacher centricity towards learner centricity. Big advantage. We measure it. Before we get into a deep discussion around the good and the bad of EdTech, let me talk about my thinking around the 3 types of entrepreneurs I've come across in this business. Entrepreneur type 1 is an ex-teacher, type 2 is an ex-tutor, and type 3 is a technologist. And they view this opportunity set highly differently from each other. That one changed, sorry. Okay, we are in sync now. So teachers will generally, there are exceptions, will generally view the role of technology as empowering the teacher in their business. The role of technology to be around customer service to a certain extent, and really using technology to deliver a better sense of learning outcomes. That is how a typical teacher-centered EdTech company will operate. A typical tutor center, and a lot of teachers, I don't know, maybe don't really want parent interference because they know what they're doing. They're very confident. They're good at it. It's a science and an art for them. Tutors, on the other hand, are very customer-centric focused because teachers don't have to collect tuition. Tutors have to collect tuition. They have to make sure the parent walks out happy even if the child is a little bit under pressure. So they are very customer-centric. How do they think about a tech company? They think they will drive technology for parent engagement. Now, is that good or is that bad? How much parent engagement, parent knowledge of the child's learning is good? How much is bad? And it can be good or bad. So tutors will generally come to you with data such as NPS, My customers are so happy, so many referrals, so much retention. Brilliant. A technologist thinks of EdTech from a consumer perspective or technology perspective. They will come and present data to me, which is around monthly retention, daily retention, customer acquisition cost, lifetime value, automation. These are metrics they've applied to typical consumer businesses, such as selling clothing. Fine, it works for that, but does it really need to be the key metric in an EdTech situation, or does it have to be more education-centric? So I want to have another conversation around something that we take for granted, because I'm still struggling with this. So any feedback is welcome, because I don't think it is obvious to me. It was obvious to me 2 years ago. No longer is it obvious to me that personalized learning and engagement are aligned. I think they're possibly at odds, because I've seen this again and again. Let me give you an example. We talk about personalized learning, and then we talk about engagement. Then I talk to entrepreneurs who tell me that to drive engagement on a mobile device, through a teacher or through a question answer practice session, there is an algorithm they come up with where the next question they deliver to the learner is a little bit harder within the same topic. So the student is encouraged to solve the question. And once they solve it, they feel empowered and engaged. If the question is super hard, harder, and the student has little knowledge but has to struggle to answer, the student loses engagement. Now let's think about it philosophically. That is what the student is given to learn. It already kind of knows. The concepts are clear. It's practice. Fine, student is engaged. But that's not what they need to learn. They need to learn what they don't know yet, where they are feeling challenged. So engagement is great for a company to tell me that my students spend 50 minutes every day on my device. Really? Okay, I like that. But what are they learning? Are they really learning what they need to learn, or are they learning what you tell them they need to learn? That subtle difference is important to me, because in the long run, if you cannot take the goodness of education, which is word of mouth, which is quality outcomes, then you will spend a lot of time proving to me as an investor that the acquisition cost is reducing over time. It should automatically reduce if you deliver good learning. That's the beauty of education. People tell about good products to everybody else because they feel proud. They feel like they got something out of it. And then education sells itself. So I believe that I would love to dig deeper into this and question myself a little bit, but I want to leave you with this contrarian thought, what do you think about it? And how do you evaluate personalized learning and engagement? This is something which is a challenging notion even for me today. So there is this is some research that has been conducted by other entities, because the topic is what's wrong with EdTech. So I figured I'd cover that and bring out what is the downside of personalized learning. Yeah, so while teachers reduced to facilitator, I think that's occurred for a long time. But a lot of the crucial aspects of learning may be ignored in that process. How do we bring those back, technology-enabled manner? And students might be lesser engaged because they feel like they are talking to a robot. They feel like they're not talking to a human. They feel like the sense of engagement they had. I'll give you a live example. In the US, where a lot of studies have been done in this space, a lot of the teachers are quitting in high schools. Why are they quitting high schools? So the data around why they're quitting high schools is because students are addicted to phones. They're looking at their phones under the desk, over the desk, and the teachers can't stop them, cannot stop them. This addiction has occurred, of course, over the years. We are all addicted to smart and lazy technology, but it's deepened during COVID. Students were used to zooming out during Zoom classes. They would like totally pan out, put their goodies on. It was incredible. So that's happening now. So teachers don't feel fulfilled themselves. So good teachers don't feel like they are teaching an engaged student body. That is terrible. How do you translate that as an opportunity? We shall figure that out. But it's a good problem to visibly see for the first time. This is something that I firmly believe is a remarkable source of driving teaching, learning, engagement, mentorship. And we often forget it. A lot of you are entrepreneurs, a lot of you are founders of companies. One of the critical nuggets that our companies, we've made 18 investments in the sector across Asia. One of the critical nuggets that separated great companies in our portfolio from average companies was that great companies brought in mentors during the last 2 years. What did they do? They were really able to take teachers and bring teachers. In fact, they made mentors full-time employees, teachers part-time employees, because mentors understand students' social emotional needs way better. Mentors can drive engagement and a sense of belonging and real personalization outside the classroom, which actually engages the student in the classroom. And the teacher then is a subject matter coordinator, ensures progress, ensures that curriculum is met. Mentors drive engagement and learning of the student outside, and they are less expensive. So EdTech becomes a more affordable solution. Teachers can cut across multiple classrooms, mentors can stick around and be available after hours as well. We've seen that work. There are downsides to this as well, but if done right, this can be a pretty interesting model. So that's something I wanted to bring up. It's one of my favorite topics right now. Also, another area where I'd love to learn from all of you, because I'm sure you've actually put this, many of you put this in practice. I'd love to get some feedback on this as well. So yeah, we've discussed this. There is definite, in some cases, reduction in learning outcomes. There's challenges in certain areas with the use of technology, and you can see how with data projector, with internet connected computer, with laptop, with tablet, where the outcomes are. I don't know the control case in this data set, and the source is McKinsey, so you should take it with a big pinch of salt, right? So I'm kidding. But seriously, we should actually examine who the study was for. But looks like this is a very interesting study to understand in which context is education used well, in what context can education technology can use better. So I think the other area which is super obvious to us at kindergarten levels, the right use of technology is even more relevant. Countries like Finland, countries that are very focused on play-based learning, have an advantage in their thinking process because they never turned entirely to EdTech during COVID to bring learning into a virtual classroom for the youngest years. They could let the children be out and play because less transmission. So that really played out for a lot of countries that were very play-focused, and they've done better in reading, learning, reading math and science areas. So I think there are certain potential tautologies, although very, very few tautologies in life, some things we can learn from. That's it. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions if any.
There was a question, interesting question on, let me just stop this. So you were asking about a poll, by the way, of the roles.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can see some of the different roles. Okay. No, okay, I tell you what, those who have questions here, please just quick raise of hand, and we do have a microphone here.
Well, thanks for the talk. It's always great to see you, and it's great to see this in person and ask a question live with words. So I'm excited about that part. I was kind of curious as to what trends you're seeing. We're particularly a higher education company, about what school leaders or deans or professors are care about in higher education, in particular post-COVID. And one thing I heard from an education leader recently was, my top three priorities are building relationships amongst people, students, the community. Number two, strengthening pedagogy. And number three, social emotional learning.
Yeah.
Like what, if you were sort of looking at this, what do you see as the key sort of things people are looking at?
Yeah, so since I haven't interacted with as many leaders in this domain as you have, so I take that as an answer that you gave at the same time. Independent of that, one of the areas which is getting a lot of attention is social emotional learning and the mental well-being of employees, of students. The pandemic has been a severe mental pandemic, emotional pandemic for a lot of people. It's unaddressed because it's a taboo topic. It's a hard topic to get into for multiple reasons. But thankfully, there are now companies which are getting into this and realizing that One is to directly address it, which is to enable, there's a company in Australia I'm working with as a mentor. They are working on employee to employee mentorship because a lot of the employees have safe employee friendships where they speak more to them. And a lot of the employees in an organization, similarly students in higher education, will only speak to fellow students, may not want to go to a therapist. So how do you engage? And a lot of the times, just expressing yourself is 50% of the job done, or more than 50% of the job done. So there's a lot of EdTech or tech-based solutions in creating better social interactions, more contextual social interactions in safe domains. That's occurring. Let's see how that scales. A second part I'm seeing is a company I'm working with out of US, which is doing a lot of just-in-time learning for college students because college students are overwhelmed. How do you take away the stress of learning by providing just-in-time contextual learning? I'm going for my gym class, and I don't have the time to watch a gym YouTube video, but I would really want to learn how do I address this issue I'm having. Before my gym class, if I entered my issue over the beginning of semester, before the gym class, I'll get a sentence of it. In today's gym class, watch out for this. And that's a little nudged, AI-based, that is going to be simple to deal with, emotionally not challenging. I can carry it out. So breaking heavy learning into micro-learning or micro self-sought learning through an automated system is another way of reducing the stress of learning. So those are two things I'm seeing happening, but I'm pretty sure there are bigger challenges for universities. One of them, of course, being the fact that students are totally disconnected. And how do you reconnect them into first of all, within the college? And the best colleges know how to reconnect the entire student body to nearby society. Because a college is a big social animal in nearby society. It drives the local social engine, not just the economic engine. Some of our best investments in higher education, one of them being in the Philippines, has made that their motto. Every time they go to a new location, they have to acquire a college. They've only gone through acquisitions. They make it their first motto to make the college a more active, more positive part of being the social animal in the region and being a change agent in the region. That really helps them get the right branding. So branding comes not through by putting I'm the best college on the billboards, but really actively below the line, working with the society and being the driver of social change or something that you believe the society needs. That, I think, social, emotional, social level, individual level, education, they're all tightly tied. Thank you, Brian. Good to see you.
Thanks, Sandeep, for your good insights as usual. From my own experience, one of the biggest obstacles for better or more adoption of digital technologies is the interest and time of teachers and educators and professors. Considering we're looking at products where this is their target audience. So interest is number one, but also the competency of those users to implement. Have you seen good examples from the companies you work with to increase capacity building of the users? And one example, I talked to Dalwich College recently, and they said they changed their recruitment requirements. So when they employ teachers now, one of their requirements is they need to have a certain degree of competency, or at least interest, or definitely a high level of tech interest, which is interesting. And maybe you have other ideas you have seen. Thank you.
So don't have an answer. I have examples of things we've seen work. One of the things we've seen work is dividing the teacher's job into teaching and technology/mentoring. Take a step back. When a teacher walked into a classroom of students, they had to play the role of a subject matter expert, disseminator, and someone that would engage the classroom one student at a time. A good teacher could tell from the body language of a student, I see the students different today. Let me ask for a one-on-one time. Today, in a Zoom class, the teacher can't see the body language, cannot have the idea of what each student might be going through. but the mentors can spend time on that. So taking out the things which are hard to do due to technology and handing them over to a better support staff is a better solution than changing the whole teaching force. I think that is more sustainable. I think great teachers, making them into great actors is a thing that a lot of companies have done, which works, but then the subject matter get compromised. I don't know. So I would not change that too much. I would bring in other support services than human beings or technologies to reduce the teacher's focus down to what they do best. And that's okay. If I can make their gradation, a lot of people say I've got a grading product where the teachers don't have to grade 100 mark sheets at the end of the week, which I think a lot of teachers don't like the most. That's fine. That's very interesting. But the moment you do that, the teacher stepped away from the child's learning and thinking process, and they can't compare what heuristic they have in their heads of remembering that child's marked sheets from last time to this time is a heuristic AI cannot quickly capture. And how they use that heuristic to play out the third time they're in the class with the student, how do you capture that? So I love the automation part, but it is efficient. Is it effective? So I think we shouldn't just apply efficiency metrics to EdTech. We should apply effectiveness metrics to EdTech. So if we change that thinking process of effectiveness at top, efficiency second, then the metrics will change. How we think of teachers will change. How we think of mentors will change. How we think of IT technicians will change. So I think it's really about having the right North Star, and then things evolve differently. That's what I think.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Sandeep Aneja.
Thank you, Derek.
Thank you. Please do keep your questions coming for those of you who are at home in Slido. We may or may not be able to address every single one, but after our third speaker, we will be having a Q&A session. So feel free to ask questions either live, if you have any questions, or through Slido. All right. For our next speaker, we have to have a secret password to use this. And now we can. Wonderful. All right. So please help me welcome Mr. Albinder Singh from Visionary Schoolman. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for having me here today. I'll jump right in. So, is EdTech failing to deliver? And essentially, EdTech promised a learning revolution. And it's clear that has not been the case thus far. Right now, I'll be sharing with you some ideas as to why that has been the case. I'll be speaking specifically about learning in the workplace and how learning facilitates productivity. So there are 5 ideas that I'll be sharing. One is the first one, alignment with work. So EdTech barriers to success, alignment with work is an issue. Cost of adoption, I think someone actually mentioned that EdTech is very expensive. I'll be talking about that as well. Issues with transference, value generation, and lack of native innovation. So the first one, making EdTech work at work, right? Or why it hasn't worked yet, right? And this is essentially where EdTech tools that you adopt. We understand that EdTech tools have in the workplace, at least to actually support workplace learning, has been very highly informed by the K-12 sector. So in fact, a lot of the tools that you use at workplace have been perhaps, LMSs, learning management systems, perhaps tools like, for example, Mentimeter, Padlet, Slido, have actually been tools that were created to support learning in the K-12 sector. And what we try to do then is to actually use that to support workplace learning. And the problem there, right, is that learning and assessment is not a fair reflection of the work that employees are doing. So essentially, if I'm a nurse and I'm going to be doing nursing, right, the tools that I use do not actually provide a good reflection, right, or opportunity for me to transfer that skills into the workplace, right? So that is actually one aspect of it. The second one is learning to business KPIs. So EdTech tools, where we actually essentially adopt them, right? Perhaps, for example, assessment. So if you want to certify if someone is ready for the work that they are being employed to do, maybe you say, okay, you score 80%, right, for your MCQs, and you're certified good, all right, you go to the work and then you start working. Now the issue there after is that once you certify that individual for that work, what does that actually do for your business? Does that mean that you will achieve all those KPIs that your business have actually set out to do, all right, and why learning is actually meant to support? So like, for example, the assumption is that, we go to the L&D department and say, hey, I need my employees to actually be trained in this particular type of skills. And I hope that by training them, we can achieve this certain set of KPIs. Does anyone actually have insight into whether that happens or not? It's really, really difficult to do. So when you actually procure learning systems, this is actually a really completely blind spot, right, for most purchasers or buyers. The third one is, of course, measuring growth. It's really, really difficult to really measure learning, right? Especially if you're using tools that don't quite actually form a baseline of where you're starting, all right? And then after, measure whether you're able to translate that into work, right? And then, of course, finally, skills, competencies, and capabilities. We see now a lot of certifications going on where we actually develop people, all right, in a whole repository, all right, of skills, inventory list of skills. So you acquire skills. What are you training for? And whether development of the individual is actually really taking place, right? Do we have insight into that, right? Are you developing the skills so that you can actually have a full suite of competencies that can then be translated into capabilities, which is essentially the capacity building, right, that one of the audience had actually mentioned earlier. Building up capacity, essentially a reservoir of capabilities so that you can maintain agility, right, to meet the challenges of today and tomorrow, right? That transference, right, from skills to competencies to capabilities. Do you see that? All right. So we were hoping that EdTech can actually help solve these tools. And I think, these challenges, and so far we have not really quite seen this. Now, cost of adoption, all right? And why it's so expensive, all right? And we actually see that when we adopted education technologies, we find that education technologies or learning become an abstract layer or an abstraction layer to work. So they become a distinct layer in which you apply above work and say, okay, all right, this is a process that I need to certify you, and I hope that you adopt the skills, and then you can actually translate that to work. And what does that process actually look like? So I think for a lot of these practitioners in the audience, curriculum development is so slow. It's really, really time consuming, and it's domain expert controlled, right? So essentially, you require good instructional designers, good assessment designers to come up with that. EdTech hasn't really solved that part yet, right? Curriculum development is incredibly expensive because it takes so long. It requires expert knowledge. It becomes very expensive. And the third one, assessment of competencies and capabilities are not personalized. So we have seen, personalized learnings. You have heard of terms like personalized learning. But what about learning, all right, from the objective of me as an individual, the sort of skills that I need to acquire, and then be able to demonstrate them as I work in my workplace? Because that is where personalized learning, all right, translates to actual work performance. We don't actually see that very well. So that's also another issue, right, that we actually have. So in this chart, I think the current intervention process is actually familiar to all of you. It typically, if I want to create a new module or a new program, I go through this process, right? We do a survey, we survey the learners, we do the analysis, and then we go back to the learning and we say, okay, I'll do the training gaps analysis, I'll analyze all the gaps, and then I'll do the instructional update, and then I'll deliver. If you take a look at all of this, where does EdTech actually feature? And does it actually make a tangible difference into any of this? So take a look at the tools that you have already acquired. Perhaps your LMSs, your tools, perhaps Zoom. What does that actually change? Is there any material change in your process? So if you get perhaps disheartened by EdTech, it could be that maybe it's a whole lot of nothing so far, right? And then finally, right, the issues with transference. You're quite familiar with the Kirkpatrick model, and I will just be focusing on the L1, L2, L3 here. So I'll be talking a bit about the last mile problem. And this is a borrowed term, right? So for those of you who are not familiar with last mile problem, this is essentially from logistics, where let's say, for example, you buy something from Alibaba or Taobao, right, from an e-commerce store. Perhaps it's an item that is coming from China. So what happens is that essentially the goods is actually goes through the postal services, right? Whether it's by sea freight, air freight, okay? It gets from the manufacturers, it gets to a warehouse. From the warehouse, it gets delivered from one country to a next country to a next country. It could go through between 2 to 3 countries before actually reaching a warehouse in your country. Now, that whole route is actually fairly efficient, right? Because essentially it's been calculated, right, over many, many data points. But finally, getting from the warehouse in your local district to your house is where the final challenge for a lot of delivery or logistic players face. Essentially, if you actually imagine in countries like India or Indonesia, where perhaps the addresses are not, quite clear, the path towards, getting to the address, the signages, the landmarks might not be clear, and that's where essentially the last mile breaks down. Too much effort, all right, goes into just solving, and so an entire economy gets built just to address last mile. Now, I would argue that we have the same problem in learning as well, which is one of transference, right? So if you take a look at the level 2 and level 3, where you go for, let's say, for example, you go for a workshop or you use any of these EdTech tools and you sort of, go through the modules. Finally, I have to then translate that into actual behavioral change. And what does that actually really look like? If perhaps I am an individual, perhaps, and let's say, for example, I'm an administrative officer, all right, and I'm required to adapt, the communication training that I have gone through, all right, to now write better email to communicate better. There are too many issues around, firstly, how I'm playing my role in the workplace, the relationship between my role and all the various stakeholders that I interact with, and how I actually translate that knowledge into actual work. We see that breaking down quite a bit. So we say, hey, our tools don't quite work. And if our tools don't quite work, what do? We take the lowest denominator then. We say, you know what? My LMSs suffice, right? I just need to deliver some learning that might actually suffice, right? And we say, okay, we actually, and when I share this, it's essentially an opportunity as well. So value generation is another issue with EdTech tools. Recognizing where and how value is generated is really, really important, because when I actually shared just now, all right, of the value chain, all right, as well as how instructions actually developed, the assessment is developed, and then finally delivered, right? Who are all the stakeholders, all right, of that learning in the workplace? So we talk about, let's say, for example, employees. If I'm an employee, all right, and I'm actually engaging in this learning, what am I expected to do thereafter? What sort of value does this learning tool, all right, this EdTech tool provide me, right? And too little is actually said so far about actually, providing fulfillment and a sense of confidence, all right, in the skills that you acquire. So that's actually a really important part, all right, of value generation for the individual. But apart from that, now that you develop the individual, what about you as part of a team thereafter? What does the EdTech tool, right, or the platform do for teams? And thereafter, what does it do, right, for the organization as a whole? Recognizing that there is an entire value chain of work and that an individual interfaces with many, many stakeholders, recognizing how that learning is actually translated, all right, and how that, all right, can provide more value at every node, all right, of the value chain is really, really important. And I'll be talking about the opinionated versus non-opinionated EdTech solutions. So, a term coined, all right, to essentially create a distinction between solutions that provide a blank canvas, all right, for example, the LMSs, where you just upload your learning content, provide a way for didactic lectures to be delivered, all right. You can perform some MCQs, things like that, where essentially, all right, you leave it into the hands of the educators, all right, to design the learning pathway for your learners. Whereas for opinionated, all right, that's where, things like, for example, gamified learning, right? You actually have these solutions actually have an opinion about how learning should take place, how learning pathways should actually be adopted. And we find that to date, the most successful platforms are still the non-opinionated ones, all right? All the LMSs, they have been so far very, very enduring, all right, from decades past, all right? And why is that the case? Is it because opinionated systems are not good, or is it they are gimmicky, all right? Like, so for example, if you learn through chatbots, right? That was a few years ago where chatbots became very popular for learning, right? And then you find that those actually don't quite, they have not actually endured, right, as you hoped. Why is that the case? Next, identifying how EdTech solutions function as enablers within the organization. Sorry. So it's important also, all right. Sorry, mouth is a bit dry. So identifying how EdTech solutions function as enablers within the organization. Sorry, 1 second, it's a bit dry. Okay. All right, I'm good. So identifying how EdTech solutions function as enablers within the organization is really, really important, because there is an opportunity here to recognize that every stage of the value chain, right, within the organization, learning and EdTech solutions can provide a value multiplier for every stakeholder. What I mean by that, if you take a look at, for example, what the opportunity for learners, all right, at a local level, then at department level, then at a C-suite level, learning can actually be your tool for strategy execution. And we are seeing that more and more. For example, right, we work with one hospital where they actually use learning performance as a guide, right, for assignments and assessment, for role assignments, for rostering, all right, for perhaps even mentoring, supervisory roles, and things like that, right? So using that as a point of data, right, to actually promote new forms, all right, of strategy, right, is an opportunity. And then, right, finally, the lack of native innovation. Now, technologies developed within other industries often get transplanted into EdTech, and this is actually a bit can be seen as an opportunity, right? So we have seen, like, for example, questions get asked, right? Right now, we are seeing VR, right, becoming quite popular. What do we do with that? right? And certainly that actually provides an opportunity. Now, the question that we actually need to actually ask, all right, are actually one of learning. Because when you go back, all right, and recognize again, right, where value is actually being generated, that will actually really help inform the type of technology that gets adopted, all right, and how that can actually be used to drive new innovations, right? So it is really, really important. And I think the opportunity that we actually really have within the education industry, all right, is that not enough technologies that are native to learning are being developed, right? And so what I mean by that, right, is that essentially, can we replicate work that you see, all right, and then use that to actually allow learners, all right, to practice and then get feedback on those performances. And then finally, all right, get feedback and then have that scaffolded for future assignments. And that, if you work backwards, you would start to see that new technologies need to be developed to actually facilitate that. If you saw, for example, the entire value chain, all right, from developing the survey design to updating the learning instruction design, and finally to delivery. And we say, this is too long, this is too expensive. And we say, okay, I want to make it cheaper, I want to make it faster. What would that look like? And if you start to think backwards again, right, that would actually be the opportunity to develop new innovations, right? Thank you.
Very much, Vinda. Any questions from the floor? Thank you.
I just was kind of curious as a follow-up, what are you seeing the top issues for workplace learning right now? Sort of like top 3 things that are top of mind that people are like, yeah, we got to solve this, this, and this. And this is like the painkiller, not the, it's nice to have.
Right. So the first one is essentially, will it make any difference? Right? So say you're pitching an EdTech tool, an EdTech platform for any sort of work, right? You say, okay, this is great for your employees. You should actually adopt this platform. Will it make any difference? If so, can you prove it to me? Right? So how do you qualify and quantify something like this? Now, it's very difficult and especially tricky in workplace. Now, in the K-12 sector, it's a bit clearer because you have a one-to-one relationship between the learning and the actual assessments. So that becomes your proof, right? If learning takes place, they'll get good scores. If they're not, right, exactly. That's the KPI. That's the KPI. And, very complex, tools have actually been built around actually, inferring that data. Much harder if I want to sort of say, you know what, you use my tool, you can train your receptionists, it will be great customer service officers. Okay, prove it. Right? Now it becomes really, really challenging. And so the challenges that I actually shared are inherent and baked into any sort of EdTech platform. So I'm talking one very, very small problem here, right? So proving it. Now, then think about it. Okay, if I want to prove something like this, then there's opportunity here to align the learning to the actual outcomes. Now that becomes a whole host of new opportunities that we start to look at. Okay, how do we, qualify that learning has taken place? How do you qualify that when learning has taken place, I'm able to then translate that into actual work performance, right? So that's actually essentially one aspect of it. Now, the second aspect would be how difficult it would be thereafter to do that continuous development. So a lot of it actually is a snapshot in time, where if, let's say, for example, I certify you, you get this certificate, what are you building towards, right? What do you hope to achieve? What this individual over 6 months, over 1 year, over 2 years, all right, what comes next? Or is that it? So we find that too many EdTech tools as well, or too many EdTech platforms says, okay, you do this, get this outcome, all right, that's it. It's like, really, is that it? All right, but then what is the next? Because, essentially you're just kicking the can down the road, right? It becomes someone else's problem thereafter. So looking at that continuous development, right, is the second major issue, all right? And so typically, the resistance, or at least from my own experience, the resistance doesn't come from actually saying, you know what, we are hesitant from adopting technologies. It's more about essentially, making that connection and making that connection of the value between what is taking place in learning and how that is going to actually impact on your business, right? So that's actually essentially where that conversation is. And so far, it's not been a very good answer there, and I think that's where, as an industry, huge opportunity.
Thank you very much. Okay. And please welcome back the rest of the speakers. For the time that we have left, we will be doing a Q&A. Okay. Is there any other question from the floor? Yes.
Right, thank you. Yeah, we hear so much about the use of AI in terms of learning technologies. How far has this use of AI helped to make the required changes to either workplace learning or in the K-12 education scene or higher education scene?
Yeah, okay. Gentlemen, would like to take that.
Okay. Not enough. I think we are saying that essentially it's very nascent, right? And of course, AI being a very, very broad term. So maybe perhaps I'll provide some distinction, right, within AI. There is a huge opportunity within the space of natural language processing. So essentially trying to make sense of text. The good thing about learning is that it's very, very heavily text-based. So we try to say, okay, can an understanding of reasoning, logical thinking take place? And I think a lot of that opportunity will continue to actually develop. Apart from NLP, right, you have computer vision, where essentially technologies get used to identify perhaps gestures, execution of skill, all right, carrying out physical processes, things like that. Now, the opportunity here, all right, is whether, all right, or how AI is actually baked into the entire learning, process, right? So essentially, is it playing a supportive role? Is it going to be the main primary delivery vehicle, right, of instruction, of assessment? I think there we will actually see it growing. But again, as it is today, it's actually completely a greenfield.
Maybe I'll add a couple of things to that, just quickly. My answer will be a little philosophical because AI has been around for 25, 30 years. It's nothing new, but it's sharper now. And to me, it always comes down to the objective function of the AI. If the objective function of AI is the perspective of driving efficiency, then let's automate tasks which require efficiency as the core of the solution. And that's happening. So automating question generation, automating student marking to the extent that you can not only mark the multiple choice questions, but you can also mark subjective answer questions, because you can read either through the pen, the student's handwriting, or parse through optical character recognition. Multiple ways of doing AI to automate the learning, teaching, administration part. Nice, that's valuable. There's a tension, as I believe there's a tension in education and learning and technology, sorry. The tension is, what is it that the system, is that system going to be used to teach? Or is that system going to be used to teach the teacher? The teacher knows what key messages were picked out from the automation of checking the answers, which the teacher needs to know. There's a big input into the teacher's design of the next lesson, or things she or he will ask in the next virtual classroom or the real classroom. How do you bridge that gap goes to the intentionality and the objective function, or the whole connectivity of AI in the teaching learning cycle. That's evolving. So right now we have piecemeal solutions. That's one, efficiency solutions. And we have effectiveness solutions, which are struggling at this time because they are as good as the designer. Right? After all, if the designer is aiming to figure out, can I increase the time in classroom of a student, an AI system will find the best mechanism where you don't know exactly what you're changing to drive the attention of students in the classroom. How good is that in designing the overall teaching and learning of students? We don't know yet. It depends on if another way of measuring effectiveness is driving learning outcomes and measuring those by trying different methods of teaching and learning. The jury is out there because it's going to take a long time to figure out which systems drive learning outcomes better than others. I think we are more efficiency driven so far in AI use of education. Exactly what Albinder said, we are early stages, and we would possibly use AI smartly for effectiveness of learning as well. And it's happening. It'll take a while.
Thank you. And I think maybe, if I may reframe the question a little bit, and I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit. So exactly what Sandeep mentioned, which is that AI has been around for a few decades. And from that question, if you see on the board, the metaverse and so on, for those of us who have been around for long enough, we remember things like even Second Life, and that was like 20 years ago. So this is not new. So I think if we have to reframe this a little bit, which would be, what is EdTech? Let's take a step back, just definitions, right? Basic definitions, just to make sure we're on the same page, which is, what do we mean by this term EdTech? Again, it's a very broad term. Is this just an idea that, anytime you use any technology in a learning context, we just call that EdTech? So for example, things like when perhaps technology or platforms that were not intentionally designed for that. If I use Google Docs in my learning, is that EdTech, for example? Or is EdTech, a tool or platform designed intentionally for learning in mind? Perhaps, what do you think? Should we make it such a distinction?
I think let's take a look at it now. There are two parts to that. There are some technology that lend itself very readily for teaching and learning. At the first place, it wasn't designed for teaching. I tend to believe that at the end of the day, it's how we use it that's important. Then what is it? What do you call it? Whether it's an EdTech or not. For example, I think Zoom was never intentionally designed for teaching and learning. But in the time of crisis, we start to realize that Zoom can be used for teaching and learning, not a perfect tool. And I know of companies, the tech startups that are working with Zoom, trying to add a layer to that, make it better for teaching and learning, more appropriate for that. Is it perfect? No, I don't think so. But I think over time, there could be competitors coming up, design it like what Alvinda used the term native, purposefully designed for teaching and learning. And I think that's what makes the technology or the EdTech industry exciting, is that you can come up with a good solution to that. Someone can come up with an even better solution. What's the intention? I think going back to what Sandeep mentioned earlier is that what is the, I want to ask that, what's the role of teachers in the future? You put the technology in the classroom, you put AI, you put machine learning, everything inside there. You don't want to perpetuate what is happening right now. What is the future of learning? How do our students learn better? I think that's the more important question. Last night I was just watching this show called Independence Day 2, the second edition of that. We're supposed to have, in that show, talk about 20 years worth of alien technology, fusion drive. Now look at the aircraft. Why is the helicopter still looks like a helicopter today? Why do we still need a long tail like for a rotor? So what is going on with that fusion drive, you call that? I think that's what we are always caught up in. We have so, our mental mode is caught in the old frame. And when we have a new technology, we call it AI or what, we cannot take ourselves out from the old frame and think about newer possibilities. I think that's what we need to ask ourselves. What's the newer possibility, exciting things for drive, human mind thinking, and then design that way, instead of trying to perpetuate what lecture tutorial system that's happening right now today. Is there something better we can imagine? I think let's go back to learning sciences. I think that probably makes my colleague back in NI very happy. That, yeah, let's look at that. But I think that is important. You build from that, the technology supports that.
Yeah, as I was sharing earlier about opinionated and non-opinionated, I think Google Docs is an example of a non-opinionated learning system, right? Essentially, if you can use it as a blank canvas and essentially provide an opportunity, right, for learning to take place within a space, then you will see such experimentation take place today and continue to take place tomorrow. And again, I think one wonderful thing that any product designer has an opportunity to do is actually learn from how users are actually using these tools as well. Because you have no idea how they're actually going to end up using these platforms as well. So essentially, like, TikTok, right, has become a wonderful learning tool as well. Is TikTok EdTech? I think an argument can be made that it is, right? That it does provide a canvas for such opportunities to actually, to facilitate learning. Now, on the opinionated side, and I think that's where, continuous EdTech focus on native, development can take place, is really to really drive the fundamental challenges of learning. So like, for example, I shared about transference, right? The issue, all right, of perhaps the long tail development, all right, of new learning content, the ability to actually provide faithful assessment, all right, of work skills, all right. Those things may not be quite, easily transplanted into perhaps, TikTok, all right. Then essentially you may say, okay, these are technologies that are native to learning, and these are then true EdTech, development. But of course, I don't want to make the distinction between true EdTech and false EdTech. But essentially, I think that's where you can really start to look at, pedagogical designs being adopted into technological platforms.
Or adapted.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. And I think, sorry, Sandeep.
No, he just lit up something for me to think about, but we have other questions. So I'll bring that into another answer, but thank you.
Thank you. And I think the idea that, and somewhat Samson mentioned, which is that sometimes when we are caught up in one paradigm, it's a little bit harder to move to other paradigms. I think that's true. If you talk about things like native technologies and so on for learning, it might just be necessary. What's our current paradigm? We create a SCORM object and put into an LMS, and then on a laptop and that kind of thing. Maybe it's about mobile. Maybe it's about TikTok. Who knows, right? So how do we move towards that? We have a question from the gentleman.
Yeah. So I was. So yeah, for the Zoom audience. So I was just kind of curious, is like just taking different lenses on, is EdTech dead or alive and stuff like that. And there are probably 2 or 3 things going through my head. One's from just like a market perspective, like NASDAQ down, Zoom down 50%, Coursera down 50% from a market standpoint. But in structure, the makers of Canvas is only down 2%. And then I look at our business, we're not down. We're up a little bit, but we're not as up as we were before. I mean, what are you seeing from EdTech companies? Because it seems like the market is saying one thing, but the on the ground reality may be a little bit different, which, we could talk all we want, but if EdTech companies are generating revenue and stuff like that, there's an unmet need that's being met. And sort of a slightly different twist on that, back to the helicopter thing a little bit, like how early are we in this thing? Like, as an American playing baseball, there's 9 innings. Is this inning 9 or inning 1 or inning 2 or inning 3? And hey, maybe there's a rain delay, but there's still a lot left to this transformation and there's a lot left to go. So I was just kind of curious on either lenses on either market valuation or what EdTech companies are actually doing in terms of sales or how deep we are into the transformation.
So what at least I'm seeing is that a lot of things are happening at the same time. What do I mean? At the same time, people are realizing the availability of and importance of something new that they never knew about. I'll give an example. If you grew up in India at my age, for the next 2 generations after me, they were parents, they were employees in the tech domain, programmers in IT space, who were making a living from it. Take my same age group in Vietnam, very few, right? So today, when I think of a family talking about IT learning in India, the conversation at that table is about what language, what are you going to think about? Computer science as an obvious option, not just mechanical engineering. Or thinking of a 6-month data science, AI, machine learning course, very obvious. I cannot take that for granted in Vietnam. In Vietnam, that parent is missing. That parent is possibly in hospitality, possibly in manufacturing, possibly in public services. He or she hasn't had the exposure to that a great extent where their life's been transformed by IT. Happened in China, happened in India, happened in the US. But there, the children have an advantage because they are constantly, subliminally mentored by society that technology is part of your life for the future. Vietnam, if I'm going to look at an EdTech company, I'm solving a social problem, a social issue, not a problem, where children are left behind because they don't have that leg up due to society telling them this is an opportunity. So the best design for a Vietnamese system is I have to bring parenting of some sort, which provides some mentoring around the value of IT learning to fore in my teaching learning environment. So the role of, then I would put companies that are startups that do stuff in IT next to the teachers, next to the learners. That's their quasi mentorship going on. That's an innovation that has to occur in learning design in Vietnam, is what you take for granted in the markets. So as you think of EdTech, you got to divest it from learning. They are very different things. We cannot assume all EdTech leads to learning, or we cannot assume that all learning comes from EdTech. Great example, that's the bulb went on. Best learning comes when you're not looking for learning. Best learning comes for me, when did I as a child enjoy learning? When my parents didn't tell me to score 90%, when I intrinsically felt I had to read the next novel because it was so exciting. And it taught me amazing language skills, I suppose, but I don't know. That taught me stuff, thinking, curiosity, learning to just be curious about language or stories or something, right? So that was the best learning. Going to a shopkeeper and talking to that shopkeeper about why he should rent me a book, not buy, for half the price he rents to others because I'm the most frequent customer. Now that's a negotiation skill I learned on the spot, spurred by my desire to learn, by my desire to read, which was my enjoyment. So if you can bring enjoyment into teaching learning through EdTech, you've got a winner. So TikTok, I don't know, but I believe that can be brilliant, right? I for sure follow a lot of channels on Instagram, which are just amazing. I have such engaging facts are thrown at me. For the first time, I'm curious about areas which are dead to me otherwise. So I think EdTech is a tool, but learning is the objective. So if we can focus on learning and EdTech is one of the tools, I think we're really brilliantly better off.
Thank you very much. Perhaps just based on some of the questions that I'm looking at, maybe we can just talk a little bit about, in this case, why EdTech is failing to begin with. What do you think, what are some of your thoughts on why EdTech is failing? Is it the way the technology is designed, the affordances of the technology? Is it the way that the technology is being used or the learner experience? What might be some, and especially in the context of, let's say, organizations, what might be some of the main reasons that, in your opinion, your experience, people are not using technology effectively for learning?
Yeah, perhaps I'll share from my perspective. I think it comes down to stakeholder engagement, really. So when we talk about, like, EdTech and the platform and the opportunities that it actually provides, who are all the stakeholders, right, that can engage with this platform? And you find that it's actually not really just solely within the domain of the L&D or the organizational development, the OD. You find that increasingly business units, BUs, are looking at learning as a key driver to achieve KPIs. So they said, okay, they identified that our people need to be upskilled or reskilled because there is a certain KPI that we actually need to achieve. So they bring that learning in-house and they say, okay, I have to achieve. We have to bring that learning. And who are the owners of the learning process? Become the BUs themselves. They become the owners of the recruitment of the individuals, the training of the individuals, and the deployment of these individuals to achieve those business KPIs. So they own the entire experience. So that you're seeing in pockets right now. So when we think about the EdTech and the opportunities that you actually provide, at least within the space of workplace, there might be an opportunity to actually really communicate where that value is being generated and to whom it's being generated. So at all levels of the different, within the organization, at all levels of the stakeholders, right? So we say, okay, at the individual level, this is what I gain. Team level, this is what I gain. At the organizational level, this is what we gain. And I think that communication so far has been lacking in parts. And I think for EdTech solutionists, trying to communicate that, I think would be the next opportunity that they would have. Thank you.
So I'll double click on failing, because failure can be one of two types, at least, maybe multiple. One is failure due in economic terms, you're not making money. The other is failure in terms of learning, you're not delivering learning. They also are not aligned yet, but they will be in the future, is my hope and position. A lot of companies that we've invested in, the smartest ones during EdTech, during the COVID times, and I go back to COVID because it's such a learning opportunity for most companies, survival of the fittest or whatever you call it. Some of the smarter companies realize they'll have to become blended learning companies. That's a trend that's occurred for all the good companies that are in our portfolio. Nothing that was purely online is purely online today. Everything that was purely online, that is surviving and growing, has an offline element, which has grown, and particularly in the last 12 months. So that's an experience. So EdTech itself has moved across the board to realization that blended learning is more effective and more profitable. Okay, so I get that. Companies that have stayed purely online are realizing that they have challenges. The behavior shift we saw towards everything going online during the last couple of years has unraveled a little bit, and there is a desire to go back offline. I think that's happening for a lot of the companies. They're a little bit late to the game. So that's the failure of learning is occurring because a lot of the EdTech companies are at this point not at a point where they're proving to the learners and to their constituents that the learning outcomes they're delivering or any outcomes they're delivering are better than what they were in a pure analog setting. That's not there yet. So I think that's a 5-year journey, 10-year journey. I don't know, but that's a journey. It's a learner journey. So, but experiments have come to a point where, at least from a financial perspective, going back to the question that you asked, Brian, around EdTech companies making money, a lot of our companies, whether they came from being colleges that adopted tech to go blended during COVID, have they retained it? 100%. Have they benefited from it? Dramatically. Companies that were purely online, have they benefited from acquiring offline players or merging with apart? All of them have benefited. So I think financially, those companies are rock solid. A lot of the companies that are shutting down, and there are many in Asia as well, have stayed purely online and haven't come out of their tech orientation. They haven't really gone towards the learning side as deeply as they should have. Maybe they didn't listen to the customer, maybe they didn't have enough funding, but all of it perhaps played out. But yeah, overall, still pretty good for most companies here. And yes, it has a remarkable difference between what's happening in US versus Asia, especially because the US was never a B2C market. It was a B2B market. It pretended to be B2C during COVID. Everything dropped off. Asia is a B2C market, secondarily B2B, smaller drop off. So I think we are more resilient here right now. But the B2B companies in US, which are LMSs, are super resilient, like the ones you mentioned. So I think it's playing out to the strengths of the local markets as it was expected. But of course, when we look at it, everything from an EdTech perspective, then it seems like they are disconnects, but they're really playing to market characteristics.
Thank you. I just want to add on that point that Sandeep just mentioned about, there are winners and losers. Yeah, in everything, not just in technology, in any industries. And understanding that, knowing the pulse, what's important in the market itself. You talk about EdTech to serve the larger picture of learning, right? And you need to be nimble enough to understand how is the market shifting, what's the need in learning shifting, and play in tandem with that. I just want to go back to a story about that. When I was with NIE, I was engaging with quite a number of EdTech companies trying to sell a solution, a product, and getting an endorsement. NIE seems to be what they think that is worthy of branding themselves. So one of those a few years back, quite a number of years back, when micro learning and mobile learning first came on board, while this company, no name over here, is that trying to sell this solution, is that that's the best thing you can do. So one of the questions I asked was that, well, we are looking at a different platform devices. I want to optimize my learning. I said, my faculty want to develop one and be able to optimize on a laptop, on a phone, or maybe a tablet, but a different learning experiences, because pedagogically they can use it differently. I gave that person an example. If I design to be a reflective piece, right? The laptop PC, it makes sense to do so because you need to type in a lot of words. If I design part of the learning as a learning journey where they need to go somewhere and then they need to take pictures, take video, and then start sharing a social learning, obviously they can't lug the laptop along. The phone or the tablet perhaps makes more sense, but it's all within one piece of the learning. I'm not citing anything fiction. That's something that we have in NIE. So I said, like, when my faculty develops something like it needs to be optimized across different platforms. But can you do that? No, this is still the best product. So do you want my faculty to do 2 times? I say, no, I'm not going to commit suicide that way, right? So not that it's a suicide or what, but you won't be able to. No one is silly enough to want to buy a product to do that. So my question to them is that, can you work with my LMS provider to make it optimized across the board? Eventually, they refuse to do that. But I think when you refuse to play with other EdTech companies, that is when you shut yourself out from the potential market. So my advice at that time, and still in that advice right now to EdTech providers, is that be ready to understand your customers' need, be ready to cooperate. You can compete, obviously, but there are times that possibly you can collaborate and get a piece of the market together rather than to kill each other. I think that's something that we can think about. Yeah.
So just to build on what you guys have just mentioned, so the question is there a discrepancy between the perceptions of what EdTech actually is versus the perception versus the expectations of what it can do versus the reality on the ground? Is there a difference in all these 3 things? And if so, what can we do, what can organizations do to make sure there is some kind of alignment between all of this, the perception, the expectations, and the reality on the ground?
Yeah, so, okay, I'll lay out a different thinking framework for this because we use it in other places. The thought process is that we have gravitated towards the word EdTech because it's doing something different than traditional education did. Why? What is it doing differently and has the potential? There are 2 potentials. There are 3 actually. We'll discuss. I'll talk about all 3, but discuss 2. The 3 are access, quality, and relevance. Access is bringing knowledge of something that's new to that segment for the first time. Theoretic. That's the extreme example of access. Quality it's like a hierarchy of needs. You first fill the access bucket, then once you have the access bucket, people have access to something, then you improve quality. Then you work on how is that higher quality product relevant to your own happiness? That's relevance. Now we're not there yet. Education was there because you could tie education to, you could look at education from an access lens. An access lens was, do female children in that segment have access to learning beyond the middle years? Or do they not? It's a very simple question, simple answer. You can look at enrollment rates of female students and say they don't have access. Now with EdTech, you can widen that access because female students in those societies don't have to go to school to learn. They can learn at home. Fine, access may deepen. So you could bridge the access gap more actively through EdTech. So that's checkbox, theoretically. How much happened? Leave the data aside. Quality is interesting. Quality is where there was access, but it was not measurable. And the quality measures were all 1 year, at least one semester. Can you deliver an understanding of quality almost in real time? What are those numbers? What are those outcomes that you can measure every day, every hour, every month, without getting too intense about it, which can help you create a feedback loop into improving your own pedagogical system, teaching, learning, etc. Now that's quality. That's also possible. Let me put that in the context of developing and developed nations. Developing nations have an access problem. Developed nations have a quality problem. Generally, there are exceptions and examples in both areas as well. But how do the developing nations therefore focused on, for the first time, bringing, and for example, a math learning for everybody by making it super cheap, putting a cricket team vest on it, saying everybody who watches cricket will read about it and they will learn about it. So access is not just about making something available. Access is about changing the mindset of the beneficiary and the user and the learner. You've got to plug both sides of the pipe. So access is pipe building. Quality is putting good stuff through the pipe. Now, once you've built the pipe, you've got to change the mindset, advertising, branding. You've got to create the product creation, expensive problem. Access is very hard to solve because it takes a lot of money. So governments solve for access because they don't look for immediate ROI. Private companies, when they look for immediate ROI, they better raise a ton of money, which a lot of companies did, right? Now, quality, on the other hand, is solvable through less money because a smart engineer can, his or her mind, drive a very smart question. I love the questions designed by NIE teachers because they trap you. And even the wrong answers have a reason because they hint upon a misconception. Isn't that awesome? In another teaching system, the wrong answers have no relevance to teaching or learning. So I like that because that really grows the, narrows down the concept gaps. Now that's quality thinking. Can we take that level of thinking and apply that to areas which have access already? And that's a cheaper problem to solve. Once it's solved, you can replicate faster. Marginal cost is limited. So quality is a great problem to solve in most markets where there is access. So I think EdTech is viewed often from solving only one challenge, which is how efficient it is. EdTech needs to be perhaps viewed from solving bigger social problems, or towards access problems, quality problems. Can we solve climate change through EdTech? Can we solve gender issues through EdTech? Can we solve access to civil services through EdTech? Absolutely, cycles along. Can we even create the knowledge that there's a problem, right? So I think there is a huge opportunity because tech finally has given faster wheels to education, which is such a slow sector. Like we talked about the analogy of education and energy. So I think we can make things happen faster, cycles will be shorter, and hopefully there'll be more accountability with data. So those are the access, quality, relevance hopes I have and problems that we need to look at. Sorry, long.
One last question from the audience here or online. Before I ask the gentleman, one last question from you guys. What are perhaps 2 or 3 things that organizations and workplaces can do to perhaps be more ready to implement EdTech more effectively for their own workforce? Before I get to that, anyone here? Okay. So yeah, perhaps gentlemen, what do you think to help an organization, if someone is watching in, for example, of course, some of our audience here, if they would like to go back to their own organization and implement EdTech learning technologies more effectively, more efficiently, what needs to be done for the organization as a whole, for the trainers, the educators, as well as for their own learners? What could be done, perhaps? Evan.
Perhaps I think organizations watching this can think about would be essentially try to explore how learning technology essentially can be a way to achieve your strategies and a driver for execution of strategies. So think about like in terms of at a macro level, what your company as a whole is trying to achieve, the work that your company does, and try to align that learning to those goals. And this will happen throughout the entire organization. And it will mean something different at each stage of, of the hierarchy. So think about how learning can be made local at an individual level, at a department level, at an organization level, and how that learning, right, can be a major driver, right, for strategic goal achievement.
The more personalized the learning, the more adaptive the learning is to the specific departmental goals and so on. That will be
absolutely. I think beyond that, essentially will be capacity building, right? Essentially, can you drive business agility? Because again, it shouldn't be just developing of for an inventory of skills, but essentially building capabilities for tomorrow.
Thank you. Sandeep?
This is awesome. I would just add one thing, which is to take the first step of collaborating internally to first of all, with the objective of demystifying EdTech. It's not a new thing. It's been with us for a while. We have an opportunity with technology in the learning space, in the L&D space, to make it more effective. And how that can be done could be a collaborative effort within the BUs to work with the L&Ds, the L&D departments, to design the right objectives. And once you design the right objectives, things will follow in terms of whom you train, how much you train, trainer, pedagogy, what you buy in-source versus outsource. So all those can be very simple answers if you get a collaborative answer to the role of EdTech in solving business needs.
So the alignment between EdTech and the outcomes for the business has to be quite very close.
Yep.
Just one last thing, add on, and well said already. Most of the things, especially when we talk about pedagogy weaving in, I think that's what I want to say about that. Just the other thing I want to perhaps give an advice to our listener or whoever is watching right now is that not everything that glitters is gold, right? I know that in a lot of times, like everybody's trying to rush out there to get people to come on board. I am in the private sector right now. I have the business target as well. But what I have always said remains the same, is that find the right fit of technology. You don't really need to be AI or machine learning if that solves your problem in your company. It could be as simple as just a Google Doc or something else that can fit your needs. Start small steps, experiment, always do a study whether it works for you. If it works, scale it up. If not, just junk it and then try something else. Or work with other people, talk to the people out there, and other people who have started, learn from them. Perhaps come back to IAL again for the next series and find out from and network with the rest who have experimented, failed before, and become successful. I think that works well. Yeah.
So in other words, and this is something that it's a phrase we like to use here. So pedagogy before technology. Focus on the learning, focus on the learning outcomes, and then see what kind of technology can help us achieve those learning outcomes. Any other questions for today? Otherwise, please give me a warm round of applause for our guests. Thank you very much for the generous sharing and insights. And thank you for yourself as well. Round of applause. And those at home, Thank you for coming here. Really appreciate that. Yeah. Just before I wrap up, one last spot of admin. Thank you. Yes, this one. And I'll show you what's upcoming next, for the next session very briefly. And just to share with you, the exciting one, for some of you, I think some of the questions that was mentioned. So very quick one, and online as well, please. And I know how it is online. Stay online. Please help us do this. This will help us inform our future programs and how to make it more relevant for you as well. Okay. So while you're doing that, just to share very briefly, okay, the next session that we have, upcoming in-lab session is demystifying XR. So you guys have heard of AR and VR and, well, XR, okay? In learning, this is an online session on 22nd of September, 2 p.m. by Mr. Bala Murali. So, okay, so yeah, thank you very much on behalf of IL and our three esteemed guests here. My name is Darren from the Learn Better Company. Thank you very much. Hope to see you guys again soon. Meantime, take care, stay safe. Thank you.